Balloons, cake, laughter. My husband suddenly shouted, "Get our daughter out of that house, now!" His face was pale, his voice cracked. "Don't ask, just run." I didn't question. I grabbed Emily and ran, with my heart pounding louder than the music. I had no idea what he'd just seen. But what happened next unraveled every lie my family ever told me, and I realized, sometimes the real danger is the house you thought was safe. Before we dive in, what time are you listening, and where are you tuning in from? It was supposed to be just another birthday party. Balloons danced lazily above the trimmed hedges, and a pastel banner that read, "Happy 8th Lily," stretched across Vera's white-paneled porch. Kids laughed somewhere inside, their voices rising and falling in bursts like a skipping radio station. I parked on the curb, adjusted the hem of my blouse, and glanced back at Emily in her booster seat. "Ready?" I smiled. She gave a small nod, clutching the small, pink-wrapped gift we'd made together the night before. Inside was a bracelet of glass beads and dried wildflowers she'd carefully arranged. "Do you think she'll like it?" she whispered. "She'll love it," I told her, even though deep down I wasn't sure. Lily was used to better. Vera made sure of that. We stepped into the foyer, and the smell of lemon-scented cleaner hit me first, sharp and sterile. Music floated through from the back deck, where Vera's friends gathered around wine glasses and charcuterie boards. Everything looked curated, picture perfect, but beneath the surface, the air was tight. Vera spotted us from across the room. She walked over slowly, heels tapping like a metronome. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, you came," she said as if surprised. "We wouldn't miss Lily's birthday," I replied, forcing warmth into my voice. She looked at the gift in Emily's hands and then back at me. "Next time you can just send it in the mail. No need to make the drive." Before I could respond, she turned and floated off toward the kitchen. I stood there a moment, blinking, before leading Emily to the backyard. The kids were playing some game with chalk and plastic wands, but none of them looked Emily's way. She sat near the steps, legs folded, watching. I knelt beside her. "It's okay," I said gently, brushing a leaf from her curls. She looked up at me. "I made you something, Mommy." From her little purse, she pulled out a hair clip, amber-colored beads set in wire and shaped like a leaf. "Wear it when you feel nervous," she said. My throat tightened. "Thank you, sweetheart." I clipped it into my hair, but the moment I saw Vera glance our way, I felt a strange flush crawl up my neck. I unclipped it and tucked it quietly into my jacket pocket. I hated that reflex, that need to make myself smaller. I used to want her approval, I thought, watching Vera laugh with a neighbor. Now I just want peace. The party carried on, squeals, clinks, polite conversations. I stood near the buffet, sipping a lemonade that tasted like air. That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Marcus. I picked up with a soft, "Hey." His voice was low but sharp, like it had been dragged through gravel. "Kaylin, listen to me carefully. Get our daughter out of that house, now." I frowned, stepping away from the crowd. "What? What are you talking about? We just got here." "Don't ask questions, don't think. Just grab Emily and leave, right now." My heart skipped. "Marcus, you're scaring me. I'm dead serious. I'll explain everything. But please, do it. Run." My hands went cold. I looked across the yard, saw Emily still sitting alone, tracing a swirl into the patio with her finger. Without a word, I crossed the yard, scooped her up, and whispered, "We're going home, baby." She didn't resist. I felt eyes on me. Maybe Vera's, maybe no one's. But I didn't care. We were already halfway to the car when I heard Lily call after Emily. "Hey, where are you going?" I strapped Emily in quickly. My hands trembled as I slid into the driver's seat. I backed out too fast, the tires catching the edge of the curb. Emily looked at me, wide-eyed. Did I do something bad? "No, sweetie, not at all." I tried to smile, but my voice cracked. Daddy just really wants us home. The sun had started to dip low, casting long shadows across the road as I drove. The silence in the car was thick, broken only by the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers, even though there wasn't any rain. Then I saw it. 5 missed calls from Marcus, 1 voicemail. I pulled over. Emily sat quietly, hugging her small pink purse. With fingers that didn't quite feel like my own, I tapped on the voicemail. Marcus's voice came through, distorted slightly, but unmistakably filled with something I'd never heard from him before. Not panic, not urgency, terror. The message played before I had time to breathe. Marcus's voice filled the car, low, shaky, and more serious than I'd ever heard it. Kaylin, don't panic. But that house, it's not safe. I just got a call from someone who used to work for Vera. She saw something. In the attic. Something you wouldn't believe. Just don't go back there. I sat frozen, my knuckles still white on the steering wheel. Emily stirred softly behind me, humming to herself, unaware. I lowered the volume just enough to not startle her, but my chest tightened with every word. The attic? I stared through the windshield at nothing in particular. A mailbox, a street lamp, an empty swing on someone's porch. All things that made sense, not whatever Marcus was talking about. My fingers moved slowly, restarting the message. His voice came again, more strained this time. She said she saw something years ago. Cameras, Kaylin, in the guest rooms, hidden. And worse than that, she said Vera kept asking questions. About us. You. Emily. I don't know what she was planning, but I couldn't let you stay. I clicked the phone screen off, but his voice stayed lodged in my head like a splinter. The silence inside the car was loud now. A few blocks later, I turned onto our street and pulled into the driveway. The porch light was already on. Marcus's truck was parked at an angle, like he'd jumped out in a hurry. I cut the engine and looked back. "Hey, sweetheart," I said gently. "We're home." Emily nodded and unbuckled herself, climbing into my arms like she did when she was smaller. I carried her up the front steps, her sleepy weight anchoring me to something real. Inside, the house smelled like sandalwood and laundry detergent. I kicked off my flats and set her down, watching her pad toward the living room to curl up with her blanket. Marcus appeared from the hallway. He didn't speak at first, just walked toward me, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched like a man carrying something heavy. "I didn't want to scare her," he said quietly, glancing toward Emily. "You didn't just scare her," I replied, voice hushed but sharp. "You scared me." He looked down. "I know. I didn't have time to explain." I moved past him toward the kitchen, flipped on the kettle out of instinct. I needed the sound, something ordinary, something that made sense. "So? Explain now." He exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "A woman called me today. Cynthia. Remember that nanny Vera hired for a few months when Lily was a baby?" I blinked. "The one Vera said got too familiar?" "Yeah, that's the one. She said she used to clean the guest rooms. One day she was dusting the bookshelf in the back room and something felt off. She leaned closer and found a tiny black lens tucked behind a porcelain figurine. Said there were more. Under the mirror, near the light fixture. Not just one camera. Several." I didn't move. My breath held. Marcus went on, voice low. "Cynthia said she didn't tell anyone back then because Vera fired her that week, but she saw enough. Enough to realize Vera was recording people who stayed there, and she remembered you and Emily being in that room." I gripped the edge of the counter. He saw the shift in my face. "There's more." "Of course there is," I whispered. "She said Vera asked about our finances, your work schedule, where Emily went to school. She made it sound casual, but it wasn't. It was obsessive." A strange pressure rose in my chest, like my ribs were closing in. "So, she was watching us?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't have to. And suddenly, so many little moments came flooding back. That Thanksgiving dinner when Vera wouldn't let Emily go upstairs to use the bathroom. She'd said, "It's broken." Just like that. Sharp. Cold. Final. I hadn't thought about it since. But now I remembered how Vera's face had gone still for a second when Emily started up the stairs, how she'd stepped in front of her and said, "Use the one downstairs, it's cleaner." And the way she always gave me gifts for the kitchen, cutting boards, tea towels, never anything personal, like she wanted me right where she could see me. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the clip Emily had made, the amber-colored leaf. Without thinking, I pinned it back into my hair. Marcus watched me. "She doesn't know we know." I nodded. "She will." He took a step closer. "Kaylin, we don't know exactly what she was doing, but Cynthia said she saw files, folders with names. There might be more." I didn't answer right away. I walked slowly to the living room, sat beside Emily, and tucked a blanket over her shoulders. Her eyes opened for a second. "Did I do something wrong, Mommy?" I kissed her forehead. "No, baby, you were perfect." And then I looked toward the window, toward the dark, and for the first time in my life, I was scared of my own sister. I didn't sleep. The soft beeping from the baby monitor in my purse had gone from background noise to something I couldn't stop hearing, even when it was off. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a lukewarm mug of tea in front of me, untouched. The morning light filtered through the blinds in stripes, brushing across the crayon drawing Emily had left on the table. A square, a blinking red dot. An eye? I rubbed my forehead and opened the monitor just to look at it again. The tiny screen blinked. Still on. Still recording, apparently. I'd forgotten it in my bag after we left Vera's yesterday, but the fact that it was still powered on, it made my chest feel tight. That camera had been watching all night. Not Emily. Not our home. Just darkness. Across the room, Marcus walked in quietly, hair still damp from the shower, holding 2 slices of toast. "You okay?" he asked, setting one down in front of me. I nodded, but the truth was sitting heavy in my stomach. His voicemail was still echoing in my head. "That house, it's not safe." What did he mean? Someone saw something in the attic. I muttered to myself, staring down at my laptop. The screen glowed softly as I typed in search after search. Home surveillance laws, California. Hidden cameras in private homes. Is it illegal to film guests without consent? The answers were a mess of legal gray areas. Apparently, if you're the homeowner and it's your property, it's legal, as long as the areas aren't considered private. Bedrooms were tricky, bathrooms were clearer. Guest rooms? That depended. "She didn't break any laws," I whispered, blinking hard. "Just trust, just basic human decency." Marcus sat across from me, watching me quietly. He didn't interrupt when I closed the laptop and picked up Emily's drawing. It was innocent enough on the surface, just a mirror above a dresser, but in the center of it, drawn in bright red crayon, was a single circle. The eye. Suddenly, I was back there. Yesterday afternoon, the cake was a lemon chiffon, Vera's favorite. There was a crowd in the dining room, clapping, laughing. Emily had run off to use the bathroom upstairs, and when she came back, she tugged at my hand. "Mommy," she'd whispered, "there's a camera behind the mirror." I'd smiled at her. "Baby? Maybe it was just a light." She'd shaken her head, serious. "No, it was blinking, red." And like a fool, I had brushed it off. Now I looked again at her drawing, the mirror, the eye. My throat went dry. "Marcus," I said suddenly, "do you remember that mirror over the cake table?" He looked up. "Yeah, why?" "You said Vera asked Emily to blow out the candles twice." He frowned. "Yeah. Said the first one was blurry. Wanted a better picture." I closed my eyes, piecing it together. She wasn't taking a better picture. She was adjusting the angle. He leaned in, eyes narrowing. "You think she was recording it? Everyone?" I stood up, pacing now. "Not just everyone. Maybe just us." We both fell silent. Then he said, low and hesitant, "That mirror had a clear view of the guest room down the hall." It hit me like a brick. That room. The one Vera always insisted we stay in when we visited. The one with the decorative vase that never moved. The one where Emily once said she saw a little red light blinking near the lamp. I sat back down, gripping the edges of the table. "If she's been recording us all this time," Marcus reached across the table and took my hand. His was warm, mine was trembling. "I got a message from Cynthia," he said gently, "the former nanny. She said Vera asked about our finances, about your work, Emily's school. She's building a file," I whispered. He didn't argue. I looked back down at Emily's drawing, and suddenly I heard my father's voice, clear, calm, the way he used to speak when he was trying to warn me without scaring me. The ones who smile the hardest often hide the sharpest knives. I could see him, sitting at the edge of the porch, cigarette in hand, his voice low and firm. He never liked Vera, said she had too many secrets for someone who pretended to be transparent. Back then, I defended her. Now I pressed the drawing to my chest and closed my eyes. "Daddy," I whispered, "why didn't I listen to you?" Marcus stood and came to my side, his arms wrapped around my shoulders, firm and grounding, but nothing could stop the spinning in my head. "Kaylin," he said quietly, "whatever this is, we'll figure it out." But I wasn't sure. I didn't feel like a woman who had any control left. I just felt watched. And then, from down the hall, Emily called out. She patted in, rubbing her eyes, clutching her stuffed bunny. "Mommy," she said softly, "Aunt Vera told me something weird." I turned to her gently. "What did she say, sweetheart?" Emily tilted her head. "She said you were sick, and I might catch it." I froze. I didn't speak right away. My breath caught in my chest as I crouched down in front of Emily, trying not to let the fear in my eyes spill over into my voice. But it was too late. She was already looking at me the way a child might look at a stranger in their own home, curious, confused, and just a little wary. "Emily," I said gently, brushing a curl away from her forehead, "what did Aunt Vera mean when she said I was sick?" She tilted her head, small fingers twisting the edge of her pajama top. "She said you act strange sometimes, that you don't want people to know what you did, and if I stayed too close, I might get the same thing." The words hit like gravel in my throat. I blinked, hoping I'd heard wrong, but Emily just looked up at me, unbothered, as if she were simply reciting something from a storybook. "And did she say that yesterday?" I asked, swallowing past the sudden tightness in my chest. Emily nodded slowly. "In the car, when you were talking to Mr. Jim and I was in the back seat with her. She whispered it. She said not to tell you, because it might make you worse." I stood up too fast and had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. Emily had already turned back to her drawing, something colorful and innocent, filled with clouds and stick figures. But my world tilted. I walked to the bathroom and closed the door. Didn't slam it, didn't even lock it. I just sank onto the tile floor and pressed my palms to my face. I remembered it all too clearly. 3 years ago, postpartum had hit me like a tidal wave. I hadn't slept in 5 nights. My body ached. My mind buzzed. I reached out, just once, for help. Vera came over with tea and a fixed smile, and after sitting down beside me, she leaned in and whispered, "If people knew what was really in your head, they'd take that baby away." It wasn't concern. It was a warning. I looked around now, searching for something to anchor me, and my eyes landed on a bar of lavender soap sitting in the corner of the tub. It was the same kind my father used to make in his garage when I was a little girl. On the day Emily was born, he'd brought me a whole basket of them, wrapped in linen, tied with a note that said, "For peace, for breath, for when the world is too loud." I picked it up now, held it to my nose. But the scent wasn't calming anymore. It smelled like memory turned sour, like something beautiful that someone else had ruined. A knock at the bathroom door pulled me back. "Kaylin?" Marcus's voice was soft. "You okay?" I didn't answer, not right away. He waited, then said, "There's something I think you should know." I opened the door. We stood there in the narrow hallway, face to face. His brow was furrowed the way it gets when he's fighting guilt. "What is it?" I asked. "Last fall," he began, "when you were in Seattle for that art conference. Vera dropped by Emily's preschool." My stomach twisted. For what? She said it was just to say hi, to bring snacks. The teachers didn't think it was strange. She's family. I didn't think much of it either. But now. His voice trailed off, the realization setting in with a weight I saw settle into his shoulders. I think she was testing the waters, seeing how much sway she had with Emily, with the staff. I took a slow breath. Everything clicked into the way Vera always hovered near Emily at family events, whispering things I couldn't hear. She doesn't want to ruin me, I murmured. She wants my daughter. Marcus didn't argue. He just looked away. And that's when something inside me shifted. I'd spent so much time trying to prove I was stable, capable, a good mother. But it was never about that. Vera had made up her mind. She'd just been planting seeds, waiting for them to take root. Well, she could water them all she wanted. I was done playing defense. I walked back into the kitchen and grabbed my phone. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I typed out a message to Melissa, an old friend who now worked in daycare compliance and child licensing enforcement. "Hey, quick question," I wrote. "Can you tell me if it's legal to install cameras in a private home during a daycare event without disclosure?" She replied within minutes. "Gray area. Depends on consent and location. Why? You okay?" I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up my email. The cursor blinked in the search bar, and I typed the words slowly. Family Legal Mediation Services. I closed the browser window with a tight breath, the words Family Legal Mediation Services still echoing in my head. But as the blue screen faded to black, something else settled over me, something heavier than legal terms and custody threats. The silence of the house pressed in, not peaceful, but haunted. Emily was asleep in the next room, her little legs curled under her favorite blanket, her stuffed bunny barely clinging to her arm. I stayed there in the living room for a long time, the glow from the hallway nightlight casting faint shadows across the floor. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just listened to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the tiny creak of the wood settling overhead, as if the house itself were remembering with me. My thoughts drifted to the day after my mother's funeral. I'd been wearing a black blouse that clung too tightly, my grief itchy and tight around the collar. Most of the guests had left, but Vera stayed, of course. She lingered like smoke in the hallway while I sorted through sympathy cards and half-wilted flower arrangements. "You can keep the house," she had said that day, her voice so even, too practiced. "But Mom wanted me to have the cedar chest. She told me that. Just stay out of it." That was 15 years ago. And ever since, the chest had sat in my garage, covered in a floral sheet, untouched, like a body in a morgue. I stood up. My joints creaked from sitting too long, but I didn't bother with shoes. I padded across the kitchen, opened the door to the garage, and felt the sudden change in air. Cooler. Still. I pulled the chain on the single overhead bulb. It flickered once, then glowed steady. There it was, pushed against the far wall beneath the shelves of old paint cans and unused light bulbs. The cedar chest. Rectangular. Heavy. I bent down, my fingers trembling as I brushed away the dust. The latch had never been locked. I just never had the nerve. Until now. I opened it. The smell of aged wood and something faintly floral wafted up. Maybe lavender. Maybe thyme. Inside there were the usual things: folded baby blankets, Mom's old shawl, a pressed corsage from Vera's high school prom. My hands moved carefully, reverently, until I found it. A small leather-bound journal. Worn at the edges, the corners softened by years of being turned over in secret. I flipped it open. The handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's. Looped letters, neat rows. She always wrote as if someone might be grading it. "I'm worried about Vera," one entry began. "There's a darkness in her. She watches Kaylin when she thinks no one's looking. I've seen it in her face. Something cold." I reread it 3 times. The words didn't make sense. Or maybe they made too much sense. My heart pounded in my throat. I turned the pages. I told Vera she shouldn't have blamed Kaylin for what happened in the classroom. It wasn't her fault, but Vera insisted, said she saw her do it. I didn't want to believe her, but Vera is so calm, so articulate. Kaylin cries when she's upset. Vera never does. The floor beneath me might as well have cracked. I remembered that day. I was 10. A glass window had been shattered during art period. The teacher had accused me. I tried to explain, but no one listened, not even my mother. That day became the beginning of something I could never name, a slow drip of doubt that shaped every interaction afterward. And now I knew why. Vera had made me the unstable one, back then, just like she was trying to do now. I clutched the diary to my chest. My body began to shake, not from fear, but from the slow, boiling realization that I had been living under a narrative I never wrote. One Vera planted. Even my own mother had let it take root. I pressed the book to my forehead and sat there, cross-legged on the cold cement floor. I wasn't crying, but it felt like something inside me had fractured, like a part of me had been waiting for this moment, for proof that I hadn't been imagining it all these years. She'd been gaslighting me since we were children. I pulled in a shaky breath and stood up slowly, knees stiff. I took the diary inside, careful not to wake Emily as I passed her room. In my bedroom, I sat at the edge of the bed, turned on the small desk lamp, and stared at the page again. She watches Kaylin. I had thought I was weak. I thought maybe Vera was right, that I was overreacting, sensitive, dramatic. But the truth wasn't that I'd fallen into her traps, it was that she built them for me. And then stepped back and smiled when I stumbled. The betrayal burned hotter than anger. It became something else. Resolve. But underneath it, guilt licked at the edges. What if I told the world? What if I exposed her? The fallout would be nuclear. My family, already threadbare, might never speak to me again. And yet, if I said nothing, how long before Emily saw me the way everyone else had, unstable, unsafe, unfit? That was Vera's real game, not just to tarnish me, but to take Emily. Not physically, not with custody papers, but with whispers, with planted fears, with stories told behind closed doors and smiles that never reached the eyes. I pulled out a notepad. My handwriting trembled as I scribbled a few lines, then paused. I didn't know how to end it. Finally, I folded the paper neatly and tucked it into the diary. On the front, I wrote in clear letters, "If anything happens to me, give this to Emily when she turns 18. I slid the book into the back of my closet behind a box of winter sweaters, then sat on the edge of the bed again, staring at nothing. Somewhere in the darkness outside, a car drove past, headlights sweeping briefly across the wall. I barely blinked. I wasn't planning to go to that family brunch, but when Vera sent that group text calling me emotionally unsafe, something in me cracked wide open. I hadn't planned on going, not even close, but the moment I saw Vera's group text, "I just want everyone to feel safe. Let's keep the brunch peaceful. Some people are just emotionally unsafe lately." Something inside me snapped wide open. It wasn't rage. It was the slow, deliberate click of a lock turning in my chest. That morning, I got up before Emily stirred. The house was quiet, the kind of Sunday stillness that used to mean cartoons and cereal. I brushed my hair, put on my soft blue sweater, and wrote a short note to Emily. "Back before lunch. Call if you need me. Love, Mom." The drive to the cafe was short, but the silence stretched long. My fingers trembled against the wheel, not from fear, but from the weight of choice. This wasn't just brunch, it was reckoning. The cafe was one of those trendy suburban places with reclaimed wood and overpriced omelets. Families chatted, couples laughed softly over lattes. And then there was our table, long pressed linen, too many forks, and all eyes locked on me as I stepped in. I didn't look away. Vera's voice cut through the chatter. "Oh, you made it." She smiled like someone offering a handshake with a needle tucked in her sleeve. A seat had been left for me, predictably, the wobbly one at the end, no cushion, a good 5 feet from the rest of the group, folding my napkin with care. "Kaylin," Aunt Colleen said with polite surprise, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. It's so good to see you. Uncle Mitch muttered, more interested in his coffee. Then came the show. Vera folded her hands delicately like a talk show guest ready to be applauded. You know, she began, glancing toward Aunt Colleen, it's just so important that we all acknowledge mental health these days. Some people are going through things and don't realize they need help, especially when kids are involved. Aunt Colleen nodded slowly, brows slightly furrowed. Well, sure. Kids pick up on everything. I kept my gaze on the butter dish. My knuckles were white around my fork, but my voice came out calm. Would you like me to speak now? Or after dessert? Everything froze. A fork clattered. Uncle Mitch stopped mid-bite. Even the waitress paused behind me. Vera tilted her head. Excuse me? I stood. My hands weren't shaking anymore. When someone calls you unstable, I said clearly, it's often because they need you discredited before you tell the truth they're afraid to hear. I reached into my purse and pulled out the slim leather journal, open to the page I had bookmarked in the dark. This isn't mine. It's Mom's handwriting. She wrote, and I quote, I'm worried about Vera. There's a darkness in her. She watches Kaylin when she thinks no one's looking. A gasp. Aunt Colleen leaned forward. Uncle Mitch raised his eyebrows. Someone from another table glanced over. I didn't stop. She also wrote, I said, flipping to the next entry. Vera says Kaylin lied at school, that she screamed at a teacher. I want to believe Kaylin, but Vera is always so calm, so reasonable. I looked directly at Vera. You've been rehearsing this narrative since we were kids. Her face froze, just for a second. Then she let out a short, brittle laugh. Is this your idea of parenting? She snapped. Digging up pages from a dead woman's diary? You want to use ghosts to raise your daughter? She reached into her own bag, all calm, stripped away now. Let's talk about your parenting, Kaylin. She held up her phone and tapped play, and there it was, my own voice from years ago, cracking, desperate. Please, Vera, I'll do anything. Just let me see her, please. The sob in my throat from that call echoed through the cafe. My face flushed. I could feel every pair of eyes locked on me. Does that sound like someone stable enough to raise a child? She asked coolly. I swallowed hard, looked down, looked up. That voicemail, I said, my voice even, was from 2019. I'd just come out of the hospital after a seizure. I couldn't speak for 3 days. I had no one. And yes, I begged, because I am a mother, and I'm not ashamed of that anymore. I stepped forward just slightly. But you? You used that moment to control me, and that… I looked directly at her. Should shame you. Vera opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I pulled a sealed envelope from my bag and placed it in front of her water glass. These are the guardianship forms I submitted. My attorney will be in touch. And then I picked up my purse, straightened my shoulders, and walked out. The cafe door opened with a soft chime behind me. I didn't look back. By the time I reached my car, my hands were still. My heart was loud but steady. I drove home slowly, taking the back roads, letting my breath catch up with my body. When I stepped inside, Emily was sitting on the floor, crayons spread across the rug. Hey, sweet pea, I said softly. She looked up and smiled. Mommy, she said, holding up a folded sheet of paper. I made something for you. I took it, and when I opened the drawing, my knees almost gave out. When I stepped inside, the scent of lavender from Emily's diffuser gently wrapped around me, a small contrast to the bitter taste still lingering from that brunch. My shoes barely made a sound on the hardwood as I moved into the living room. Emily was on the floor, her markers and crayons spread out like a fan around her. Hey, sweet pea, I said softly. She looked up, eyes bright, and held out a folded sheet of paper. I made this for you. I took it from her hand, still wearing the polite smile I'd kept since walking out of that cafe, but the second I opened it, my knees buckled. I sat down too quickly, on the armrest of the couch, The drawing showed three figures, one tall, one small, and one scribbled out with red crayon, violently as if erased in a frenzy. Jagged red streaks cut across what should have been a person. The other two, a child and an adult, were drawn gently, almost tenderly. "This is me," she said, pointing to the small figure. "This is you, and that's the one who says I'm wrong." The one who says I'm wrong. That phrase hit me like a slap. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't new. When Emily was 3, she used to whisper that same line to me after visits with Vera. Back then, she couldn't explain it. I thought it was a child's confusion. I wanted to believe it was harmless, something she'd forget. But she hadn't. And now she was 6. I laid the picture on the coffee table, hands trembling slightly. "Emily, what do you mean, the one who says you're wrong?" She picked at a spot on her sleeve. "She tells me my memories are messy, that I remember things wrong, but I don't. I remember the hallway, the loud sound, the shiny red nails." My stomach dropped. Red nails. Vera. She's always worn that same glossy red polish. I remember it too. How it flashed in the kitchen light whenever she pointed a finger, usually at me. How my mother's lips wore the same shade when she told me to lower my voice. How my grandmother once whispered, "You've always been too much for this family. Be quiet." That red had always meant silence. But Emily remembered, and she wasn't confused. She was fighting it in the only way a 6-year-old could, with crayons and a child's defiant honesty. I reached for her hand. "You're not wrong, sweetheart. You remember just fine." Her shoulders eased as she leaned against me, small and warm and brave in ways I didn't know children could be. I stood up carefully, grabbed my phone from the counter, and walked into the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, the drawing still in my hand. For a long moment I stared at it, replaying all the times I'd second-guessed myself, let things slide. Told myself I was being too sensitive. Not anymore. I scrolled through my contacts and tapped on Dr. Jensen's name. He picked up after 2 rings. "Kaylin?" "Hi," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need your help. I want to file for exclusive custody, and I want you to testify." There was a pause on the other end, then a warm firmness in his tone. "I was wondering when you'd be ready. You've documented everything. You're not the woman you were 2 years ago." "I know," I whispered, "and thank God." After we hung up, I exhaled, a long, deep breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding in for years. But peace didn't last long. At 8:47 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Not the kind of neighborly knock. It was sharp, measured. I peeked through the peephole and saw a man in a navy jacket holding a flat envelope. "Delivery for Kaylin Porter," he said when I cracked open the door. I signed, shut the door, and opened it on the couch. It was a cease and desist letter. From Vera's lawyer. "Accusations of emotional manipulation, defamation, weaponizing a minor." I read aloud, eyebrows rising with each sentence. Emily peeked around the corner from her room. "Is everything okay, Mommy?" I tucked the letter beneath a book. "It will be, baby. It really will." I stood there for a moment longer, letting the weight of that sentence settle into my spine. Vera was scared. That's why she was lashing out like this. And scared people make mistakes. That thought lit something inside me. Calm, cold, and determined. After I tucked Emily into bed, kissed her forehead, and turned off her nightlight, I returned to the living room. I sat quietly, phone in hand, letting my thoughts sort themselves out. Then a notification blinked across my screen. Aunt Colleen. Her message was simple. "I saw the drawing. I believe you. Tell me what you need." I didn't cry. Not this time. I messaged back. "I need access to the family trust records. I need everything you know about Vera's donations, the accounts Mom never listed." There was a pause, then a reply. "Already started. Check your inbox. Let's take her down properly." I opened the attachment she sent. It was a folder, labeled Vera's donations, untraceable accounts. I clicked on it and leaned forward. The game had changed, and I was no longer playing defense. The next morning, I walked into Mr. Peretti's office carrying a flash drive, Emily's crayon drawing, and a silence inside me that no longer trembled. My steps were firm, not heavy. I wasn't there to prove anything. I was there to end what needed to be ended. He ushered me into the mediation room with a clipped nod. Vera was already seated, crossed legs, not a hair out of place. Her blazer looked expensive. Too expensive for someone who claimed her fundraising events were all for the kids. She smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't warmth. It was theater. The mediator introduced herself, then went over the guidelines, none of which Vera seemed remotely interested in following. The moment she was invited to speak, she launched into a performance. "She's emotionally unstable," Vera said, gesturing toward me without even looking. "I've tried to be patient. I've tried to be loving. But she screams. She isolates the child. She rewrites the past in her head and expects the rest of us to play along." I didn't say a word. Not yet. "She thinks I'm trying to erase her," Vera continued, touching her chest like she was the one wounded. "But the truth is, Kaylin has been unraveling for years. I have letters from Dr. Carla Jensen stating as much." She reached into her folder and handed something across the table. Fabricated. I knew Dr. Jensen hadn't written a single one of those lines. The mediator looked from the paper to me. "Ms. Brooks, do you want to respond to that?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the flash drive. "I'd like to submit this instead," I said. "It's a copy of the Department of Education's audit from last year on Vera's foundation. Page 17 is especially interesting." Vera blinked. "Questionable use of charitable funds," I added, "and a pattern of misreporting expenses, particularly donations from untraceable accounts." I didn't need to raise my voice. The room was already cold. Even Vera's hands froze midair, like her mind hadn't decided whether to fight or flee yet. Then I pulled out Emily's drawing and laid it on the table. "She drew this last night," I said. "This is me, this is her, and this," I pointed to the red scribbled figure, "is the one who keeps telling her she's wrong." The mediator leaned in. Emily's words from the night before were still echoing in me like a hymn. "She says I remember wrong, but I don't. I remember the red nails." And then, for the first time in the entire meeting, Aunt Colleen spoke. "The child remembers everything," she said, her voice steady. "Stop pretending she doesn't." Vera's mask cracked. She tried to recover by pulling out her own weapon, an old recording, grainy, clipped, but timed for maximum damage. "I didn't want to play this," Vera said dramatically, "but you forced my hand." She pressed play. A woman's voice, my voice, crying, trembling, words out of order. "I can't do this. I need to go. I need to go far. I don't want her to see me like this." It sounded unhinged. If you didn't know the context, it sounded exactly the way Vera wanted it to. "She threatened to disappear with the child," Vera said, dabbing at the corner of her eye. I didn't move, but inside me, that trembling silence stirred again. That was the night I hid in the pantry. Aunt Colleen stood slowly. She placed a signed affidavit in front of the mediator. "I was there." She locked herself in because Vera chased her into the kitchen holding a broken perfume bottle. The crying? That was fear, not instability. The mediator took a breath like the room had been holding it for her. And Vera's face twisted just for a second, long enough to reveal what was underneath all that polish. I turned back to the mediator. "I'll be filing for full custody of my daughter, and I will also be opening a case for defamation and child endangerment." Vera scoffed. "You think a judge will listen to this circus?" I looked directly at her, voice even. "And if they don't, then the media will." Vera's chair scraped against the tile as she stood. Her heels clicked toward the door like gunshots. She paused only once, just long enough to throw over her shoulder. "You're nothing but a bitter little girl who never grew up." But she was wrong. I didn't rise to it. I didn't chase her. I just sat there breathing because for once the air wasn't full of her lies. As she left, a memory surged, Uninvited, sharp as glass. That upstairs bathroom in the house we grew up in. The door always locked. No mirrors anywhere. When I was 10, I asked her why. She said, "Because mirrors are for people who want to see themselves. We don't have time for that." But now I understood. There were no mirrors because Vera couldn't bear to look at who she was becoming, a house with no reflections, because no truth was ever allowed to stand still long enough to be seen, and I had spent half my life walking through it, thinking it was normal. Not anymore. That evening I took Emily home, gave her a warm bath, read her 2 books instead of 1, and tucked her in with her drawing still by her side. I stood in the doorway and whispered, "You remember right, sweetheart. You always did." Then I picked up my phone, called Mr. Peretti and said just 6 words, "Let's move the court date up." And he replied, "Already done." The court date was set, but before I stepped into that building with its cold walls and waiting eyes, I made a quiet stop. Emily and I sat together on her bedroom floor that morning. I tied her shoelaces while she pressed her forehead to mine. Her voice was soft but steady when she asked, "Will it be over today?" I tucked a small cloth bundle into my purse and whispered, "It starts being over today." By 9:40 a.m., I walked into the county family courtroom, the same flash drive in my coat pocket, and Emily's drawing folded neatly between my fingers. Mr. Peretti was already there, organizing his papers. Aunt Colleen gave me a small nod from the gallery bench, coffee in hand. She didn't say a word, but she didn't need to. Vera sat across the aisle, dressed like she was heading to a charity gala, hair curled to perfection, lips painted a strategic shade of red. Her attorney leaned toward her, whispering things I could guess without hearing. She didn't look at me. Not once. Judge Laramie called the room to order with a quiet presence. No gavel, just a nod and calm eyes that somehow softened the edges of the room. She opened the folder on her bench. The evidence came first. Financial statements from the Department of Education, detailing every cent of Vera's fundraisers that never made it to the district's scholarship fund. Then came Emily's school report. Dropped performance during her stay with Vera, paired with a note from the school counselor about sudden fear of dark spaces and crying fits after drop-offs. Next, Aunt Colleen stood and gave her statement. She didn't embellish, just truth, steady and devastating. She confirmed the night Vera had locked Emily in the closet because she wouldn't stop crying, and the days Vera left her home alone to teach her responsibility. Then came the documents verifying my own medical history. A licensed counselor's evaluation. No signs of mental instability, no diagnoses, no history of violent behavior. In contrast, Vera's therapist letters were declared inadmissible. The judge read aloud the investigator's report. The listed credential ID number belonged to a veterinarian in Montana. When Judge Laramie finished reading, the room was dead silent. Her decision came clear and fast. "I hereby grant Kaylin full legal and physical custody of Emily Carson. A protective order will be placed effective immediately. Vera Carson may not approach, contact, or attempt to communicate with the minor or her mother until reviewed in a subsequent hearing." I didn't exhale until I realized I'd been holding my breath the entire time. Vera still didn't move. Then she slowly stood, looked at me, not angry, not shaken, just cold. Like everything she planned had slipped out from under her so quietly, she hadn't even felt it. "You think this makes you a hero?" she muttered, low and bitter. I met her gaze evenly. "No," I said, "but it means my daughter sleeps without fear." She turned and walked out. No scene, no breakdown, just footsteps fading out of the courtroom like the end of a tired song. That evening, after everything was filed and stamped and signed, I returned home. Emily was waiting in the doorway. The second she saw me, she ran. Arms tight around my waist, her tiny hands clenched the back of my jacket like if she let go, I'd disappear. I led her into her room and sat on the rug we'd picked together. From my purse, I pulled out the old faded doll. I'd washed it, stitched the torn ear, and replaced the missing button eye. Emily's hands trembled when I handed it to her. "She smells like you," she whispered. "She's not perfect," I smiled, "but she came home." Emily held the doll to her chest like it was something sacred, something alive. Days passed, and one quiet afternoon, we went to the park near the lake. The breeze carried the sound of children's laughter. I watched Emily climb and swing and run like the world had finally remembered to give her space. Aunt Colleen sat beside me on the bench, sipping coffee from a cracked ceramic mug. We didn't talk at first, just sat in a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Then I said, "For a long time, I thought surviving meant being quiet, keeping my head down, not stirring anything." Aunt Colleen glanced over but let me continue. "But I think real strength isn't silence. It's standing up with nothing but the truth and saying, 'This is enough,' even when your voice shakes." She patted my knee once, firm. "And that's why she's safe now." Just as I nodded, my phone buzzed. An email popped up from the local nonprofit for women's legal advocacy. Referred by the court counselor, they said. They offered me a part-time position, helping mothers in crisis navigate the system I'd just survived. I didn't even have to think. I clicked reply. Yes. That night, I tucked Emily into bed. She hugged her doll and whispered something I didn't quite catch, but it sounded like thank you. I stood in the hallway for a long time afterward. Watching her sleep, I thought about the house I grew up in, the one where mirrors were scarce, where truth was inconvenient, and I whispered to myself, some houses have no mirrors, and some daughters grow up to become them. Have you ever had to protect your child from the very people who read every single one? Or felt like the truth would cost you everything,